They read the compact ruling to me in a stone hall with cracks already running up its walls, and I remember thinking the cracks were the only honest thing in the room. The magistrate stood on a dais of black glass, robed stiff as roofing slate, and told me the law in the flat voice of a man reciting a tide table. The mineral seam beneath HFY's capital had gone unstable. Their scholars had a name for it that meant, roughly, the breathing rock, because it swelled and split and exhaled fire in cycles no one had learned to predict. My people had learned. We had the harmonic anchors that could quiet a seam like that, slow its breathing until the crust could be shored up properly. The compact's terms for sharing that technology were simple and absolute. A bonding, a marriage of law, between the reigning sovereign of the world in danger and the ranking human sent to save it. Not romance, leverage, a guarantee that neither side could walk away from the other's collapse. The ranking human, in this case, was me, Garrick Voss, 44 years old, 20 of them spent listening to rock through a stethoscope of cable and sensor. I wasn't a diplomat. I wasn't anybody's idea of a consort. My hands were scarred from drill collars and my boots tracked ash across their polished floor, and I watched the court's eyes catalog all of it while the magistrate read the terms. Queen Kyrell Ilmara did not look at me once during the reading. She stood at the head of her council in robes the color of banked coals, her ochre-red skin dulled with exhaustion, ash-blonde hair pinned back hard enough to look like armor. When the magistrate finished, she said only, "Then it is done," in a voice with no more warmth than the stone under my boots, and a steward fastened a thin bronze seal shackle around her wrist, and a matching one around mine, and that was the whole of our wedding. Her court called me the drill hand behind cupped hands, not troubling to lower their voices much. One of her senior advisors, a tall man named Vosk with a voice built for pronouncements, stopped me in the corridor outside the hall on my second day and asked, not unkindly but not kindly either, whether I understood what I'd been given. "She has ruled this world since she was younger than you are now," he said, "and the compact hands her to a man who smells of drill grease. Do not mistake the law's convenience for your worth, technician." "Wasn't planning to," I told him. "I know exactly what I'm worth here, about as much as one working anchor. I intend to be that." He hadn't expected the answer, and it seemed to cost him something to walk away without a reply. I let it pass, same as the rest. I hadn't come to be liked. I'd come because a world was cracking open and somebody had to walk out onto it with an anchor rig on his back. For 6 days I did exactly that. The seam ran under half the capital, a network of fissures widening by the hour, venting sulfur-yellow steam that turned the sky the color of a healing bruise. I set anchors in a ring at the worst of the vent sites, calibrating each one by hand because the automated rigs kept drowning in interference from the rock itself. My crew were her people, laborers mostly, conscripted off the evacuation lines because every trained hand was needed. I didn't order them, I worked beside them, took the worst posts myself, learned their names before I learned the magistrates, and made sure the ones with children got pulled back to the safer sites first. The work was slow and mean. Every anchor had to be lowered by hand crank into a shaft still venting heat, seated against rock that shifted under the drill bit without warning, then tuned by ear against a reference tone until the harmonic caught. I lost 2 anchors to sudden blowouts before I learned to read the warning tremor in the stone a half-second before it came. My crew learned to read my hands instead. A raised fist cleared the shaft before I'd finished shouting it. A woman named Tessa, who'd hauled cable for me since the first morning, told me on the 4th night that her husband had died in a seam collapse years back, and that she'd expected the compact's technician to forget her name by sundown. I told her I already knew it, because she'd said it once and I hadn't seen a reason to lose it. She didn't answer, but she brought me something bitter and hot the next morning without being asked, and every morning after. Kyrell came to the fissure line on the 3rd day, ostensibly to inspect progress. She stood a long way off from me at first, arms folded inside her sleeves, watching me lower a calibration key into a vent stack half swallowed in steam. When I came up again, face scorched red, hands blistered through my gloves, she was still there. "You could have sent an underling," she said. "Didn't have one to send," I said, "and I wouldn't ask a man to climb down into that if I wouldn't do it myself." She didn't answer, but she came back the next day, and the day after, and stood a little closer each time. And I noticed she'd started asking the evacuation captains for casualty counts before she asked for anchor field readings. I noticed, too, that when a boy no older than 12 came sprinting up from the lower terraces with a message that his grandmother's block had lost its footing, Kyrell didn't send a steward. She went herself, down through the ash, and I broke off calibration and went with her, and between the 2 of us we got the old woman out from under a collapsed awning, with nothing worse than a cracked wrist. She looked at me over the woman's shoulder as we carried her clear, and something in her face had changed. Not softened exactly. Opened. They told me the compact would send a technician, she said quietly, once the old woman was handed off to the medics. They didn't tell me it would send someone who'd carry an old woman on his back through falling ash for no one's benefit but hers. Wasn't for no one's benefit, I said. Was for hers. Kyrell studied me the way she'd studied the Fisher readouts, carefully, like a woman deciding whether to trust an instrument she hadn't calibrated herself. Then she turned and walked back up toward the assembly hall without another word, and I went back to my anchors, and didn't let myself read anything into it, because a world that might split open under my feet within the week didn't leave much room for hoping. By the 9th day the ring was closed, 40 anchors, humming in a low harmonic that the seam, slowly, reluctantly, began to answer. The venting eased. The tremors that had been shaking dust from the assembly hall's rafters every few hours went quiet. Her seismologist ran the numbers twice, then a third time, not quite believing them, and told her the capital would hold. They gathered the council in the Cindermere Hall that evening to confirm it formally. The same black glass dais, the same magistrate, though his robes had gone gray with ash like everyone else's by then. He read the survival report in the same flat voice he'd used to read the marriage terms, as if the two announcements weighed the same to him. Maybe they did. Kyrell stood, and instead of thanking the magistrate, she held out her wrist and asked him to remove the seal shackle. He hesitated. Your Majesty, the compact bond is not conditioned on the crisis. It stands regardless. I know what it stands on, she said. I read the terms myself, 6 days ago, and I didn't feel a thing when they locked it on me. Take it off. He did, reluctantly, working the small clasp free. She held the open shackle a moment, looking at it, then set it down on the black glass rail in front of the whole council, her advisors, her captains, the boy's grandmother among the onlookers with her wrist still splinted, watching with the rest. Then she crossed the hall to where I stood, ash still in the creases of my hands, and took hold of my wrist instead, the one still wearing my half of the bond. I won't ask a law to hold you here, she said. I watched you for 9 days and never once saw you claim anything for yourself. Not comfort, not credit, not me. So I'm asking you plainly, with no magistrate's ruling behind it. Stay because you choose to. Marry me because you want to, not because a tribunal wrote it down. The hall had gone very quiet. Somewhere behind her, I heard the old woman let out a small, satisfied sound, like she'd been waiting 9 days to hear exactly this. I looked at Kyrell Ilmara, queen of a world she'd nearly lost, ash on her face same as mine, offering me nothing but herself, freely, with the law set down on the rail behind her, and I didn't have to think about my answer at all. Then take my wrist back, I said, and this time I'll be the one asking. She did, and in front of her whole surviving court she smiled, not the composed, careful smile of a sovereign, but the real one, the one that had been waiting under 9 days of ash and duty for a reason to come out. That's the only wedding either of us ever wanted. The compact's paperwork still calls it a bonding. We call it choosing each other, and we tell it that way every year, on the anniversary of the day the ground finally, gratefully, held still.